Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Book Leads Impactful Books for Life and Leadership. I'm your series host and leadership performance coach, John Jaramillo. This podcast series is about getting to the books that have impacted and influenced the people in my network, leaders, colleagues, friends. I want to get to those great reads that these great leads can share with us to just for our understanding to share that value of what it is they took away. There's so many people that have shared that they have multiple books that they want to share, or there is that one book that stands out that they want to share on here. So, in this particular series, I cover three categories of books. The first being a book that I haven't read that they're sharing with me. A second, where we've both read it, whether specifically for the series or in our past lives. And then the third category of books is where I speak to the actual author and or publisher of the book, just to help them get the message out of the book that they're sharing. In this particular episode, I'll be talking to the author. So for this particular episode, my guest today will be Alyssa Berthiaume, and Ali is the founder of the Right Place, Right Time, her virtual boutique of book coaching and ghostwriting services. As a ghostwriting guide or ghost, Ali serves leaders, entrepreneurs, visionaries across North America and Europe who know they have the power to activate healing, their own and their readers, by sharing their stories and spreading their message. She supports her clients in writing the book that will light up their world and ours. Ali is also the author of Dear Universe, I Get It Now, Letters on the Art and Journey of Being Brave and Being Me. She's co-authoring her next upcoming book, due out sometime this August or August of 2023, which is currently still untitled, but that will focus on helping newbie nonfiction authors write, publish, and promote their books. So I'm looking forward to that, as I'd like to dive into that arena, Ali. When she's not at her keyboard or stuck inside a book, you'll find her drinking maple lattes, solving the most recent hunter killer case, watching The Princess Bride for the umpteenth time, or spending time with her husband and son. And I was introduced to Ali through Edie Clark, who also introduced me to a few other of my guests. And Edie's a video producer and YouTube strategist, and I appreciate so much this network. I don't think I had even spoken to Edie. I think she just saw somehow maybe a hashtag, maybe somebody had shared it, but she reached out and thought that there were some great authors that she had in her circles. So here I am with Ali. So Ali, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. And thanks to Edie. I love Edie. So big shout out to Edie.
Yeah, I love that she did that. That was amazing, especially somebody that I had only met, in a few messages before that. But that she saw what I was doing and kind of trusted it enough that she can look for quality, I guess, and connected us. So I'm very appreciative of her, and I'll be interviewing her next week. So
Oh, good.
I'm glad to finally make it to the hub of this little mini network that I
Yeah.
have.
Oh my gosh,
Uh,
you're gonna learn so much. And she's fabulous. She and I are gonna do a small project together here in the near future, which I'm pumped about. We've known each other for several years, and I keep saying, like, I can't wait to do something with you. I can't wait to do something with you. And it's finally happening.
yeah. Yeah, it's amazing when you meet somebody and you know they have like a great energy, they have a great background, they have great passion. Like to me, that's more important than the actual craft, just because you can meet people that have skill in
Yeah.
craft, but they don't have that drive, they don't have that passion, that tenacity. So it's amazing when I collaborate with somebody who it doesn't look like we're supposed to link up, but somehow we look for that connection. So I'm glad you two will be working on something.
Yeah. Yeah. It's gonna be good. It's gonna be good times. I'm not gonna reveal anything. She might talk about it in her interview.
Yeah. I should pit you guys against each other and say, well, she gave me, so much information
Go
and
for it.
see what I see what I can get. Ali, as we jump into this conversation, first I want to learn about who you are. Because obviously this is well, not obviously, but honestly, this is our first face-to-face conversation. We talked through email when Edie connected us. We talked by phone just to kind of get familiarized with each other's work leading into this. But who are you today? Can you provide a breakdown of the work that you do in the day-to-day, just so we can get a sense of who you are?
Sure. Cliff Notes version of who I am. Um, I am a creative deep down into my soul. And the art form or medium that I choose to kind of express the most is obviously through writing, which then branches out into the work I do with people, helping them go from novice and newbie to confident author. Um, and so that's through that lens of being the ghostwriter or the book coach. But I'm also a mom. And I like to say that my son is the greatest story being written currently, and my favorite character that I get to influence. Uh, so
I
there's
love
that
that.
piece. Um, and so, I would say that like my three biggest hats right now in life are mom, entrepreneur, and then I recently was married, just New Year's of last year, so freshly and newly married. So those are kind of my
Congrats.
three, thank you, three main hats. Um, and you got a little bit of a taste of what I'm about in my bio, but something that's probably not in there is that I'm really, really focused on people. And so almost everything that I do has kind of a touchstone of just really loving people and wanting to make them feel seen, heard, and valued. And I take that into the work that I do as a ghostwriter and a book coach and a writing guide. And that is kind of my day to day, is being in those seats.
Allie, I was going to jump to the next question, but then you brought up just the power of people being seen, heard, and so on. Did anything in the pandemic, did that kick up at all during the pandemic? I don't know. I mean, well, the next question is going to be about your past, how you started off your career, how you got to
Yeah.
now. But
Oh yeah.
before I even jump to that, I'm just curious, did the pandemic um, kick up that passion for helping people tell their stories because there was such a physical disconnection between people for obvious reasons?
I would say, if anything, the pandemic validated what I already knew, which was that people need to be seen, heard, and valued. Um, and just so I'll segue from there into that next question. So I have a background in kind of two areas. Writing has always been there. I've loved writing since I was 5, and it has been a lifelong like motivation or calling to get to where I am now, working with books every day. But somewhere along the way, part of my story is that I was told by some adults in my life who I really wanted permission from that writing wasn't practical. It wasn't going to pay the bills. It wasn't going to keep the lights turned on. And they really encouraged me to pursue a different vocation that was going to be a little bit more financially stable from their perspective. So the second kind of passion that I developed out of the quest to find what this other thing um, was the love of people, which translated into psychology. So
Mhm.
I actually got 2 undergraduate degrees when I went to college. I got a creative writing degree and I got a psychology degree. And I worked in community mental health for a couple of summers. I worked in domestic violence and rape crisis for a couple of summers. And I also had some time working in an assisted living center for our geriatric population, also one summer. And then embarked on a graduate program to get my master's in marriage and family therapy, which ultimately didn't win out. I switched programs and went after my master's of fine arts in creative writing. Um, but what I learned through the love and interest in people via psychology, mental health, domestic violence, and rape crisis was how much people need to be seen and heard and valued. And often that is through storytelling of the experiences we've been through. When I worked in community mental
Mhm.
health, I was partially responsible for something called reassessments. So every 2 years, the adults in our persistent mental health unit that were receiving services needed to be reassessed to make sure that they could still receive those services. And part of that reassessment process was me sitting in rooms with these people and interviewing them. And naturally, what happens, as you know, John, from being a podcast host, when you're interviewing people, the thing that they end up going to is sharing parts of their story and experience to answer the questions. And when somebody can then reflect back to them, wow, that must have been so tough, or how did you get through that? It's very validating and it's also very healing. So I kind of knew going into the pandemic that there was a deep need for humans to be human and to be recognized for being human in whatever that looked like. Um, and so the work that I have, the work that I do has a lot of crossover, which often I don't talk enough about, between that psychology background and what I do as a ghost book coach, writing guide, because it's almost like the center of the wheel, if you will, is is that human story and human experience.
Ah, I love that. Yeah, I could tell, or just surmised that when you were talking about your undergrad, um, just between the psychology and the creative, it's just all there. And I think it's just so important. As soon as you said that combination, there's just something powerful about the psychology, about the expression of the creative to be able to just, I don't know, think about, share about life, share about each other's stories. Um, and I ask that only because my appreciation for people's stories grew so much during the pandemic
Mm.
because
Yeah.
of, the need that you would see that people were alone, that they didn't feel, they felt disconnected. Luckily, we live in the virtual world, so we pivoted to that ability to express that way pretty quickly. Obviously, we had to do what we had to do, but I just, during the pandemic, it just really picked up. And then creating this podcast and hearing from authors and hearing from guests. I mean, that's why I ask, what is it from your past? Like, how did you get on this path to now? Because I think we don't hear each other's stories enough, and we don't tell our own stories enough.
Yeah.
It's
And it's
just,
so
it's
important.
incredible. We're
Yeah.
so bad at it. Um, Maybe because the platforms aren't there, maybe because we think it's kind of like imposter syndrome for our own lives where no one's going to want to hear it from us. So that's why I love this podcast, where it's just an opportunity for people to just, share stories that other people can listen to, maybe be engaged with, maybe be impacted by. Uh, it's powerful. It just seems like a very simple conversation, but I've heard great reactions from people just based on what people have been able to share, a question that I've been able to ask.
Hmm. Yeah, it's huge. It really is. But to go to something that you just said about like why is it that people are so bad at it? Um, from my own personal perspective, culturally, we're told not to think of ourselves,
Yeah. Oh
right?
yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Um, and and then there's other people who could argue that we think too much of ourselves. So it's like, what's the balance? I don't know, but I think a lot of the time we're told, that to be in our own energy is selfish,
Hmm.
right? And so therefore, we don't want to talk about ourselves because we don't want anybody else to perceive us as being selfish or self-centered or self-oriented by saying our own thing. Now, professionally, how I see that play out with clients is one of the very first pieces of doubt when they're thinking about writing a book, especially about their life, which is memoir, more often than not, and that's kind of where I like to play the most
Hmm.
from a genre perspective. Is, well, why would anybody care about me? Why would anybody care to hear what I have to say? And so there's this automatic invalidation of our own experience because we think that we're nobody.
Hmm.
And when we break that down, how sad is that? That we automatically have decided that we are nothing when we would never in a million years likely say that about anybody around us, right? Um,
Absolutely. That's a very good
we would
point.
we would never say that, but we say it about ourselves and we say it about our own story. And yet at the same time, when I can get people to kind of move beyond that and they actually work on their story in a written form, I get things like, this was deeply healing. I
Hmm.
feel like I'm chiseling away at some other layer of who I am. I feel like I'm integrating fragmented parts of myself back into a whole self. I feel lighter. I feel more empowered. And the list goes on. The benefits of having just taken the time to honor their own story. Um,
Yeah.
and so I've come to realize that the work that I do, the book that they're writing is like the byproduct. The actual result to me, that's like the thing to be really, really proud of, um, is that they put voice to some of the hardest or most critical moments of their lives to be more healing. And then they also have a book that will hopefully help somebody else. And so in my bio, right, there's a couple of pieces in there about like healing ourselves, healing others, write the book that will light up our world and yours. Because
Hmm.
I really believe that when you are writing your own story, it's a twofold thing. You get the intrinsic benefit of the self-validation, seeing and hearing yourself, which we don't spend a lot of time doing because we're constantly looking outward for other
Yeah.
people to see and hear us. And then also the external kind of reward of not only other people seeing and hearing you, but making impact for somebody else to be able to see and hear themselves through your story.
Hmm. No argument from me. As I was reading your bio and I got to that piece where it was about them and others, your story and ours, it just makes complete sense. I've seen your coaching is different from my coaching, but it's similar in terms of in the end, when the person feels most fulfilled in my coaching, from what I've seen, is when they are themselves, when they do reach back and they don't. It's almost like what you said. You said it before a couple minutes ago about that we're told to express ourselves, but then not express ourselves. And it's almost like we're indoctrinated as kids just to kind of learn math, learn history, learn civics. All important, I agree. But and there's creative writing classes here and there, but there's no that I know of. And my kids are young, so I don't know what is in the later stages of life or school, but there is no intentional, proactive expression of who you are telling your story. And I've just seen the power of it in my coaching that mimics and parallels the one that you're talking about when people are writing about themselves. And there's just something about writing it down, seeing your story, like almost if you don't, it's almost like if you don't see yourself in a mirror, you don't know you exist. If you don't see yourself on page, it's just up here, it's trapped.
Yeah.
It's committed to your memory, but there is something about writing down your story. I just finished a chapter for a book, and it was um, very brief, 3,000 words about my history, my story, and then a lesson for professionals building their businesses. And there's just something about me outlining on the page. I knew the lessons, committed to memory from my parents, but there was something about outlining it in a strategic form that breaks out what my experience was and what I took away. And it was just by the time I finished it, I had an additional stronger perspective on my parents, the lens on the way I grew up and the value that I can bring to people. It was insane. It was a byproduct, nothing I expected, but like you said, a
Right.
byproduct of
Yeah.
that core mission of writing something down.
Yeah. And a lot of the struggle with new writers is that, so especially when they're working on memoir, they're like, well, I've lived 45 years, 55 years, 60 years, 30 years, right? And they're like, how do I get it all into a book? And they're overwhelmed. And so they do nothing. And so all of those memories and all those experiences stay trapped up here, internalized, and they can't see anything, like no forest, no trees, just
Yeah.
like a hazy mist in front of them. And it's like they have this kind of like impetus that they should be writing something, but they're so overwhelmed by the content of their life that they don't know how to pare it down. They don't know if it even makes any sense. And then of course that relevancy doubt creeps in. Well, who am I and why does it matter? And whatever. And one of the first exercises that I always have them do is something that I call drain the well being your mind.
Mhm.
And it's basically a process of dumping all of the memories, all of the experiences that like first rise to the surface, right? We all have them, like that one really embarrassing moment in school, that time that we got hurt, that bully, that really hurtful thing that somebody said to us. We have all these like critical pieces of like of how we've become who we are. And I say, get it all down. And usually I like post-it notes because post-it notes move and
Yeah.
they're more tangible. And it's amazing that once they get it all down in writing, they can start to see patterns and trends of their own kind of like path and like whole life story that they otherwise might not have been able to tap into because everything was trapped internally and there was no visualization of all the things that they've experienced and been through. And then once it's all out on the paper, I can say, all right, let's sift and filter. What are you noticing? What's coming up that's rising to this top about what you ultimately want to say? Because memoir at the end of the day isn't about telling your whole life story from start to finish. That's autobiography. It's a totally different thing. Memoir is about picking, maybe one theme and a period of time that you want to share so that you can really let the reader know something very specific that's crucial and meaningful to the human experience.
Huh. I never thought about that distinction between the two.
Yeah.
Huh.
And a lot of people don't. Like, they're like, oh, I'm going to write my life story. And so it's like, on Tuesday, the 28th of March, I was born at 8:11 a.m.
It was a
When I
foggy morning.
was 5, we had a birthday party and I got to ride a pony, and you're like, oh my
Yeah,
God,
yeah.
stop. No. Um, Autobiography is nonfiction and it's about your life, yes. But it reads more like history and it reads more like a series of chronological events and facts. And usually autobiographies are pretty much about the people that have done those really notable things where other people are really curious about how they became great and powerful. Albert Einstein and Nobel Peace Prize winners and things like that. Most of us don't want to read an autobiography about our next door neighbor from start to finish. However, memoir memoir has this beautiful sweet spot living between the worlds of nonfiction and fiction. It's nonfiction in that it's about the author's life, but it reads like a novel, which is
Okay.
where the fiction elements come in. And so it's more engaging. You're more enticed. You're more hooked as a reader. And you get lost inside that story because you forget that they're a real person. And then you're engaging with material in a different way. You're trying to see how what they've been through mirrors some part of your own experience. And that's where memoir has to be crafted and why it's its own specific genre, because there are certain moves that you have to make in order for it to be powerful and for your reader to care.
No, thank you for making that distinction. That just never occurred to me at all. Yeah, I was probably using them or thinking about them in place of each other interchangeably. Ali, as you were going through your career, what is it that what was that switch from your last career to what you're doing now? What was that trigger that said, okay, this is what I want to do? Because you worked in so many different areas. What was that thing that caused that change?
The Cliff Notes version, um, the Cliff Notes version is that I was at a time in my life where everything bottomed out. And I like to say that the ashes of my former life were down around my ankles, and there was nowhere else to go but up. Um, to make that less abstract, I went through this year where the job that I was in, the promised promotion, got stripped away. I got nearly demoted from the lowest job on the ladder, and I still can't make sense of that. But somehow I had fallen from grace in this company. I was no longer going to get the promotion, and that was happening simultaneously as I was on the path to divorce. I had just had a miscarriage of my second pregnancy. I was living at home with my parents, for the first time in a lot of years. I had a 2-year-old that I was trying to be all the things for. Um, and I was kind of just like sitting here going, this is not what I thought my early 30s were going to look like. And it was a really transformative year for me because I remember thinking, who did I think I was going to be by now? Like, where did she go? Because at one point I was like, this is my life path. Like, this is the trajectory I'm going to go. And it had always been with writing there kind of in the wings. And but I just kept letting all this other noise in. Writing wasn't practical, so it had to be on the side. And I found that I had also done other things in life, I think, that were based off of the standards that feel like are set for us
Hmm.
about what we're supposed to do when checking things off the list, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, this doesn't work for me, like, clearly, because all these things have now gone wrong. And I feel like such a failure. Um, but when I took enough time to reflect back, what I realized is that the reason I had gotten to the point where all these things had bottomed out was because I had been ignoring myself and my calling the entire time. I just kind of like brushing it aside to try to fit into these other boxes. And I think finally the universe, and this is basically what my memoir is about, Dear Universe, I get it now. Finally, the universe was like, all right, all these other little small lessons ain't cutting it. Like, you were not getting it. You were just ignoring everything we're trying to tell you. So let's just clean the slate and wipe everything out so that you will pay attention to like what is happening. And so there I was, and I thought, all right, I give up. You win. I'm open to receiving whatever it is that you need to say because I've clearly not been getting it. And then it was like one by one, all these things lined up. I read all the right books. I listened to all the right podcasts. I had all the right people introduce me to these other people. And before I knew it, I was on the path to setting up my own virtual business. Um, and I had a 6-month plan of like getting out of this day job and going out on my own. And that was in 2018. And I walked out of my job at 6 months as planned in April of 2019, 2 months of living expenses in the bank. a hope, a prayer, and serious determination. And I went for it. I leapt. And I never have looked back. Not to say that there aren't some tough times where I go, what am I doing? This is insane. But I honestly could not see myself going back to a regular 9 to 5 or day job. It was like I was born for this, and I just didn't have words for it. I didn't have the self permission and the self validation for it. I kept looking for it everywhere else. And so I went out as the right place, right time in April of 2019. Um, and it's had lots of evolutions since then. Started at copywriting, and now we're over here in coaching and ghostwriting.
That's awesome. Because like I've read a book, unlike not you, but what comes to mind is you're going through a career trajectory, and it's you have your family, and then you have to pivot later in your career. So it's like late blooming, but um there's something to it though. Even though, the universe is dropping you hints, I think there's something to coming to that realization later in life when you've already had like these other experiences. Like if you had given into that inclination or that pull when you were 22, 23, I don't think you'd be as strong as you are now with your work and your passion for it.
I think everything is about timing. I don't know that any time prior would have been the right time. Like, even though the universe might have been nudging, like, you're supposed to be writing, you're supposed to be writing, you're supposed to be
Mhm.
writing. Um, so, I trust that there's like a higher power and a higher plan, which is also a little bit about what Dear Universe is about. Um, and so I don't really have any regrets, as painful as that period of time was. Um,
Mm.
I've kind of learned over life, because there's other things that I had been through before that year that had taught me this already, that your messiest moments are actually your greatest gifts. And usually when I've got a really messy year, that means I'm about to have a really great year.
Mm.
Because growth is what happens during the messy year. And I've actually been able now to say, like, man, I'm going through some serious shit, but I know that means that there's some next level of transformation that's about to happen, because I'm learning so damn much right now, even though it's so painful. The way that I like to say it to people who are working on memoir, right? Because memoir is basically about your messiest moments, is that your messy moments are like a poop emoji gift with a bow. Nobody wants a poop emoji gift. You don't even realize that that's going to be helpful to you at the time. It's not what you want. It's not what you want to receive. It doesn't look good. It doesn't look fun. There's nothing awesome about it. And then a couple years later, you realize the importance and the value of that gift that you've been given, but you can't see it at the time that you're going through it.
Yeah, I've learned to appreciate chaos. Um, and like you said, when you're going through it, when you're younger, you just think this is it. This is what it's always going to be, is just this chaos, this mire of shit. But hopefully, as you get older, you realize that there are lessons in all of that,
Yeah.
in how you come back and how you rebuild yourself, and maybe new people you surround yourself in. Maybe it pushes you to go find the education you need to do the other thing that you want to do. Maybe it wakes you up to do what you've always wanted to do, as in your case. So I've come to appreciate chaos. It's like an unintentional restart.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
sometimes it can be a blessing. So
Yeah.
believe me, I'm with you. Allie, what was it about, if you can remember this far back, but what was it about writing when you said you've been writing since you were 5? I mean, was there anybody around you that was writing, or telling you to write stories, create things, create worlds? Like, do you maybe not know specifics, on Tuesday,
Yeah.
September, whatever, but do you have like a sensation of what you felt when you were really with your
Yeah.
earliest memories of writing?
So before I turned 5, like, my earliest kind of like childhood memories are basically me barefoot in the woods, making up songs and dances and elaborate plots. And the trees, as silly as it sounds, the trees in this like cove that was like next to my family's house, they were like characters. Like, that person was going to be the dad, or that tree was going to be the dad, and that tree was going to be. Um, And I would talk to them. I would converse with them, acting out these things. So I had a pretty robust imagination. I also had two grandfathers who were storytellers and exaggerators. And I don't think I realized that until much later in life. But they definitely had like this natural ability to just like segue into storytelling. And one I think was slightly delusional because he wanted to be somebody that he wasn't. And the other one generally just liked to relive these moments that he thought were hilarious. And so he really was telling stories in all good fun. At 5 was when I got my first black and white composition notebook in kindergarten and started to learn my letters and how to write them myself. And it was one of those composition notebooks where the bottom half of the page was like the big lined, it looks like a
Hmm.
road, right? Like the two solid lines with like the dotted line in between so that
Yep.
you can practice your capital letters and your lowercase letters. And then the top part was white so you could draw your own picture. And I just, only thing that I remember was that that was my favorite time of kindergarten was me with this black and white composition notebook. And that's also where the background of Dear Universe's cover comes from. Is it's an homage to the black and white composition notebook from when I was 5.
Yeah, that's what it
And
reminded me of. Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
so that's the connection there. And it was just like I just kind of knew. I was also super inspired by characters that I loved at that time. So Anne of Green Gables, Laura Ingalls, both these young women who aspired to be writers. And they were some of my favorite female or characters when I was little. And I just thought they were the coolest. And I even though they were from a totally different era, I just felt really connected to them. So writing had always been this thing, and even after 5, like as my writing developed, I remember buying journals like at the pharmacy, and I would pick the one that had the cover that I liked the most because I wanted it to look like an actual book. So I remember one journal I had was a lavender color with a unicorn and a rainbow on the front. And so the story I created in that journal was about a unicorn and a rainbow, and it was a fantasy. Another journal I got a couple years later in middle school had roses on it. So I wrote a YA romance, and my girlfriend classmates, like in the 8th grade, literally passed around these journals to one another and read them like they were books.
That's so cool.
And they were all written in pencil. I mean, the pages have smudged over years.
Yeah.
Um, and so, I mean, up until probably late middle school, early high school, when I started to get really involved in things, NHS, student council, field hockey, like whatever it was, I was really kind of like, I just loved those hours being by myself in my room, filling journals with stories. Um, and and then I think once that high school time period hit, that's kind of where I got off track. I started to
Mm.
think about college and what I was supposed to be doing, and I had less time for filling my notebooks, and I think I even felt a little bit silly about doing it. Even though it probably would have been more filling to my soul, and I probably would have stayed more on my path if I had kept doing it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where the writing stems from.
Yeah, I'm always curious what it is from someone's past that might have sparked what they're doing now. I think yours is the earliest in life that I've heard those great examples of what it was at 5, around 5 years old that the author was doing. But that's amazing. Thank you for sharing. Before we jump into the book, Allie, what does leadership mean to you?
Oh gosh, leadership to me is the way that you show up for yourself and others. That's the most succinct way that I can describe it. Um,
Yeah, and I love that you share for yourself, because I mean, yeah, leadership, the word itself implies that it is about leading others, but so many people forget about that initial part, that you have to lead yourself first and do best by yourself, not taking away from anybody else, but they forget about that part of building themselves up.
yeah. Well, I was just saying to somebody the other day that so I'm on this like health and fitness journey right now. And part of my motivation for this is that I see myself on stage in the near future speaking. And I have this like visualization of the way that I look on stage. And it's not a vanity thing.
Mm,
It's a confidence thing. It's the way that I want to light up the room with energy. And I know that like my energy lately has been low. So my energy is probably low because of lifestyle habits, foods that I'm eating, like all these things. And so I think I said it to my husband. I said, if I'm going to promote something to someone, I want to actually be doing the thing that I'm promoting. Like, I don't want to always be the cobbler with holes in their shoes, which I think can be very easy for entrepreneurs, right? Because we're so busy helping other people with the thing that we're not necessarily doing it for ourselves. And I don't strive to be like that. Like, I strive to do the things and model the things before I'm going to tell anybody else to go and do the same things, right? And that to me is leadership. Like, you need to have a solid sense of who you are in order to help anybody else have a solid sense of who they are. How are they supposed to tap into their own root if you haven't tapped
Yeah.
into yours,
Your own.
And that
Yeah.
was the problem I saw actually in the marriage and family therapy program that I was in. One of the things that was so disenchanting was how many students were in there that had so much of their own unresolved crap that I was terrified of these people going on to get their licenses, not fixing themselves, and then attempting to fix others. And I thought, how is that going to be a culture of change if we're just perpetuating or trying to fix our own stuff at the same time we're trying to fix others?
Yeah.
Um, and I was like, I can't, like, I just can't. Like, I didn't stop being, a marriage and family therapist necessarily because of the things that I was seeing, but it was eye-opening to me that, people were just heading into this program, I think, ultimately to find solutions for themselves under the guise of trying to help others find solutions. And I just found that the order of of events to be very backwards.
Yeah. No, and I love what you said about just that whole process of if you're going to be teaching it and preaching it, evangelizing your message to somebody else, the importance of living it. I can believe me, I can relate to that. I've thought about that. Like, if I am going to prove myself to be a coach, yeah, you have to live with a certain energy. You have to live with a certain self respect, a certain self motivation. So I can I relate to that a lot. So now let's jump into the book. Ali, can you introduce your book and I guess just kind of give us a lead up to you've given so much background to, but what was it that was the actual trigger for you to start putting the book together?
Okay, so this I do have like nearly an exact date.
Okay.
Um, so I already mentioned I walked out of my day job in April of 2019. Um, Less than a week later, I was on a plane. I was heading to St. Louis to attend a live event with about 100 other women who had recently created virtual businesses from their homes. And I was sitting there listening to one of the speakers, and she was sharing her part of her own personal story about how she had been robbed at gunpoint while working at a bank, and from there had kind of traversed some serious PTSD, depression, suicidal ideation. Flash forward to a different presenter, and this woman was sharing about how her whole life she was striving to be more and to get to this place of accomplishment and respect and abundance because her mother had told her on a regular basis in her childhood that she didn't want her and she basically would have gotten rid of her if she could have. And I was sitting there, and obviously part of me was devastated for these women, but there was this other like immediate download. And of course, by now, right after this last year I've had, like, I'm like tuned in, like the universe is giving you a message, it's like getting an email in your inbox. And it was like, this is where you want to go with your business. This is what you want to do. And this was, you want to support other people in writing these stories that have obviously shaped and motivated who they have become today,
Mhm.
right? Because for better or for worse, those messy moments have the ability to actually make us and not break us, depending on how we choose to respond to them, right? Now, there are plenty of people who are going to choose to just become the victim
Mhm.
and whatever. And there's other people who don't have a choice. The horrible things keep happening and they're out of their control and they live unfortunate existences. So I'm not saying that it's always about choice, but there are also those people who have taken the messy stuff and have done something with it to benefit themselves and to benefit others. And so it was like, I want to do that. I want to help other people write their stories into books so that they can like get their own story and message out there, and they can help change other people. And then the next piece of information that came in right after that was, how are you going to show anybody else how to do this if you have not done it for yourself? Which goes back to what we were just saying, John,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Like, do it for yourself first before you start, preaching and doing it for anybody else. And so I left that conference like basically only 1 week out of my business, which I started as copywriting, knowing that that's not where I was going to end up, that was not where I wanted to be. And also knowing that I needed to write my own story. I needed to write my first book and stop having it be this 30-year dream. I needed to freaking do it. And so that was kind of the impetus for the book. It was this idea of like, I got to prove myself. I got to honor my own story, and I got to prove myself, because who is going to trust me and take me seriously with their story if I can't even trust myself with mine and take myself seriously?
So then how do you decide? You don't have to go through the entire process. You don't have to go through all your post-it notes, but like, how do you decide how much to put in there, what to put in there? Um, Obviously the autobiography is much more detailed than the memoir is. So how do you decide? How do you decide how to craft that?
So through the post-it note exercise, which I did myself, what came up for me when I was looking at those post-it notes kind of makes me think of like those crime shows where you've got the really smart person and they're looking at all the facts on the board, and all of a
Yeah.
sudden the numbers are like woo, like whirling in front of them, and they solve the equation. Um,
Hmm.
what was popping out was that a lot of the things that were rising to the surface for me at that time all had to do with being authentic and being brave in that authenticity. Right? So the subtitle of the book is Letters on the Art and Journey of Being Brave and Being Me. So what I decided was I was only going to focus on the stories that I felt like had something to say about me trying to find my way back to myself and braving that path. And I got rid of all of the other post-its. So then that left me with maybe 20 main stories or ideas, which then I looked at, and it basically said, well, this looks like it could be very easily done chronologically, like put them in order of how they occurred. Um, Now, the memoir is epistolary, meaning that it's a book of letters. That's kind of the structure of the book. And the letters was something that came to me in a dream. Um, I had a dream of just the word Dear Universe, um, and the Dear Universe kind of lent itself to like, well, if it's Dear Universe, I must be writing to something. And if I'm writing to something, it must be like letters, like I'm writing letters to the universe. So that's how kind of that idea came about. And so the book is essentially 21-ish letters to the universe about what I learned from these specific stories in my life.
Now, are you talking to the universe, meaning not just reporting back, but asking questions, or, I don't know, I don't understand why you put this in front of me, or how did you, what was, never had to ask this question, but yeah, was it kind of like a, not a vent session, but was it at times because of the difficulties you may have found in that path, kind of wondering why or pointing the finger? Is there any anger in there?
So there's one chapter where I talk about the death of my college roommate. And that chapter is like, what the hell, universe? Like, I still don't get this one. This here, this sucked, and it was painful and it was hard, and I still don't get it, and I don't understand. Like, what was I supposed to get from this? Like, this feels unfair and unjust. By the end of that chapter, I do have some takeaways, right?
Mhm.
But it's really it's like a dialogue. It's like, hey, universe. Like, some chapters are very
Yeah.
flippant and irreverent, and other chapters, depending on the thing, is like, you suck, like that sucked. Like, and I know there's something that I could take away, but like, let's not forget that this was really crappy. So it's very much an interaction, and yes, the letters are to the universe. It's to higher power, like, all right, what's up with this?
And
Like, here's what I think, but
how often have most of us asked that question? You know,
oh
I
my God,
think
so many times, right? Like,
I
oh, why
I
me? Why now? Why this? Like,
yeah. And
yeah.
I think I've gotten to the point in life where when I do like stop in my path, in my tracks and look up, maybe not look up, but ask that question like, what the fuck? Like in the
Yes.
past, maybe it was like, woe is me. Maybe it was sadness. Maybe it
Oh,
was
sure.
anger, whatever. Now it's
Yeah.
just kind of like, all right. I mean,
Curiosity.
yeah, curiosity and this too shall pass. I mean, you know, we know we don't want to be in the thick of it, but that we know that if we were diligent with how we respect the situation, try to do as much as we can to get through the situation, you know, knock on wood, most times it works out, but you still have to go through that mud. You still have to go through that forge, I guess. But it's interesting how your reaction in life, I do kind of just it's almost like a brief letter to the universe where it's like, okay, I see what you're saying, what you're doing, what you're trying to show me, or you know, or maybe I don't, but I'm going to muster up and try to get through it. But I think it's interesting how that changes as you mature and just realize it's not finite, it's not going to end.
Yeah,
That you can make your way through it.
totally. And so like there's one of the earlier letters in the book, um, is this kind of funny, flippant chapter about what I thought my parents were saying to me when I was younger, when they would tell me to sharpen my tongue, hold my tongue, file my tongue. And um, when I was younger, I was internalizing that as please stop talking, right? And now, as an adult and as a parent, what I realized is that they weren't trying to get me to stop talking or stop expressing. What they were trying to instill in me was a better understanding of when to speak, how to
Mm.
speak, and how to speak to who I was speaking to, right?
Yeah,
Like
just refine what you're saying, not
refine what
shut
you're
up.
saying, not shut up. But they didn't really go into the details of like why how I said it should be said differently. It was just like, Alyssa Yvonne, you know, file your tongue, you know? And so it was like there was never a conversation. And so I was just like, man, they really just I don't want me to say anything. But I carried that message for a really long time. And it took me becoming a parent to recognize what was probably the intention behind what they were saying. Right. And then the letter, so this particular letter gets really funny because, like, towards the end of this letter, I tell this story about my son being like 3 and he doesn't want to leave this indoor playground thing that we've been at. And he's so upset about it that he's kicking me and punching me and saying, "You're a giant penis," out loud in front of all these other in front of all these other families.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, would you just shut up? You know, you know, really embarrassed, feeling like I'm being judged, feeling like all the other parents are like looking at me, and also very proud that he's using anatomically correct words. Um, and like how you know how the tables have now turned and interpretation and context come with time and wisdom and age and understanding, right? um and so, yeah, when stuff is happening, we have a lens because up until that point, we only have any of the experiences that have happened up until that point, right? To help us understand them. It's not until we get another however many experiences ahead that we can look back on the one from before and look at it differently, right? That's why they say hindsight is 2020.
Mm.
Um, so, you know, the beautiful part of memoir is that you get to kind of like reframe a lot of the narratives that you've now held on to or believed about your journey and your story up until now, because you get to look backwards and reinvestigate what was actually happening.
Mm. That's a very good point. It's almost like the wheels are turning in my head.
You want to
Just
write a
to
memoir, John? You want to do
uh,
that?
well, I mean, it's just here's the thing. Like I've always said, like I'm an introvert. Um,
Yep.
so not every introvert is the same. But there were times where people would say sometimes like you're quiet or you're very quiet or what's up, like, and just because somebody may be quiet doesn't mean that there isn't like a play by play going on in their head.
Yeah.
So that's if I could capture those moments and say, okay, this is what people saw, this is what's playing in my head. It's just a very interesting exercise that you pose there, Ali, to be able to go back and say, to know for yourself, this is the way that I saw it as a kid or as a teenager, as a college student. Hindsight's 2020. It wasn't that bad. So maybe I can look back at it with a little humor. I think that's just a great exercise to be able to look back and just kind of change that perspective. Um, so many questions I have for you. Was this process therapeutic for you? I mean, we've talked about how going back and it should be for people, but how much did it change the way that you looked at your past? Because we talked about the general exercise of people writing things down and it
Yeah.
being good for them. What did
Yeah.
it do for you?
Oh my gosh. I took away so many things from writing my memoir, things that wasn't expecting. So the obvious ones were, number one, I finally did the thing that I've been talking about doing for 30 years. So I was like, yes, I got it. Like I finally did the thing. I accomplished the dream. To have my name and my face on the cover of a book that's mine. So there was that. That was kind of an obvious takeaway. Um, I found more and new grace, I think, for some of the people in my life that in earlier pieces when I didn't understand things, I kind of saw
Mm,
as villains.
yeah.
And I don't mean villains in like a Cruella de Vil kind of way, but like,
No, I know.
kind of like contradictory to what I wanted to do,
Yes,
even if they were
yes.
well intentioned, right? And so, I found a lot of grace and healing for some of these folks, and obviously a greater understanding, because as I was writing about certain events and experiences, I was really digging into like more of what that experience might have been. And like I had already gone to therapy for a really long time, and I still, like, as I was writing, I found like new layers to a perspective that I hadn't fully formed or had like put down on the page yet. Kind of like one of those things where you don't know what you're actually thinking and feeling until you see it.
Mhm.
And so it was like peeling back layers of an onion, really. Um, and so, those things were all kind of obvious. The things that weren't obvious was like, I didn't realize how liberating it would feel. Um, I also didn't realize like how much I was actually modeling for my son. So one of the coolest and funniest moments was the week that I got the first proof of my book. Um, it was the first hard copy. It was my last chance to look at it as a physical thing before it got like made available publicly. Number one, when I opened it, I wept, which I wasn't expecting. Um, but then a couple days later, when he came back to my place, he was done his part of the week with his dad, and then he came over here. I mean, he has this like sharp eye for like anything that's new or different in the house. He can spot like within seconds of being there. And he was only about 4 at the time. And he saw the book on my desk, and he saw my face on it, and his eyes were like this. He was like, "Mom, what is this?" And I said, "Oh, well, that's the book Mommy's been working on." And he was like, "I want one." And what he meant was he wanted to do it too. And this moment was so touching for me because I remembered being his age, just about, right? Or you know what? He was just about to turn 5, which would have been the age that I knew that I wanted to write. And I remember feeling like at 5, knowing that this is what I wanted to do. And then I also remembered flash forward another however many years and kind of being told that it wasn't the thing to do.
Mm.
And here he is, and he's like this little mirror to me saying, I want to do this, and I said to him, and you can, which wasn't necessarily a message I felt like I was getting. And I thought, oh my God, I have just given him the single greatest permission that I don't feel like I got, that held me up for decades. Now, where it gets funny is that in the next moment, we had a complete and utter meltdown because he wanted to do it right this second. And I was trying to explain how, like, this you have to type up on the computer. It has to go somewhere else. Somebody has to, I was trying
How
to
dare you,
explain,
Ali? How dare you?
and then it was
How
like, he
dare
said,
you stop him? You
you know,
said
and so
I could.
he's like,
I
and now
only
he's like,
laugh because
"Who
I
said
can
you?"
relate. I know, I know.
Oh my gosh.
I only laugh because I can relate.
And so then I can't help it. I'm laughing. And he was like, "No, I'm being serious." So now he's like yelling at me because he thinks that I'm finding it comical. And it was, but so it was just this like, it was like this huge but simple moment in this process where
Mm,
I felt like I'm doing something right, and not just for me, but for him. And that was like, that blew me away. And the other thing that came out of this that I wasn't expecting was I was so worried and so focused on what if people hated it. I left no room for what if people love it.
mm.
None. So terrified of being the imposter, of writing a crap book, of people not getting what I was trying to do, of people not caring about the stories that I was sharing. Like all of the mental garbage that I see my clients go through, I went through. And I mean, like just like biting my nails, as it becomes publicly available. Luckily, I had had a number of endorsers and beta readers who had read it and loved it. So I was like, okay, I'm breathing. Like, it's already got good feedback. It'll be fine. And, as people started to read it, I was hearing from people all over the place, and they were connecting with it and they were loving it. And on the more sadder side, I had people coming to me saying, "Me too,"
Hmm.
about certain things. Or my favorite, and this still happens, there's like magic in this book. I read your book at the exact time I needed it. Like this divine timing.
That's
Like,
huge.
something that you said in this book made me realize this about where I'm at right now, and people related to different chapters differently. But all of a sudden it was like I took this step back and I thought, wow, I
Yeah,
knew that there was power, but like, this is like some incredible, mind blowing stuff.
yeah, and it's one thing to see change in somebody you're working with, like somebody you're coaching, but then it's another to see change from people you don't even know, people
Yeah.
that reach out to you. And I mean, it's not only your son whose life you're opening up by allowing or granting, or just not even granting or allowing or giving permission, but just saying, the world is yours if you want it, go get it.
Yeah.
It's not even him, just him that you're doing that for. It's like all the readers. Think about maybe a girl out there that kind of lived a very similar life, and she thought that she had to go, I don't know, into the corporate world or into college and graduate school, or maybe was on her way there, read this book, and then it changed the way that she think. Maybe I don't know. Just I think we always underestimate that, is the ripple effect of anything that we write, any book that is published. I mean, it's powerful.
Yeah. So one of the coolest stories, I got this random Facebook message from a person that I had gone to high school with. I hadn't talked to them in decades. I probably hadn't even really talked to them before we graduated, in all honesty. We didn't travel in the same circles. And he wrote to me to say, "I read your book. Now, number one, I had this kind of like preconceived idea that men would not pick up this book. So that was the first thing. Shame on me. But I just did. I thought like women are going to flock to this book, men are not going to be interested." Um, and he said to me, I heard or saw that you were working on a book. So as soon as it was available, I bought it. I was like stunned. And then he reminded me of this thing that I didn't even remember, that apparently we played together when we were kids because his grandmother lived on the same court that I did.
Mhm.
And I remembered his grandmother, but I don't remember playing with him. So it was like, wow, like I had left this impression that I didn't remember leaving. And then the third thing he said was, "I read this book. I've encouraged my wife to read it. I think she's going to get so much from reading your story because I can see her and the things that she struggles with in the book that you've written." And then he thanked me. And I was like, what? Like,
Even if that was the only reaction you got for your book, that'd be amazing, I
and
think.
that, yes. And that leads me to the next thing I wanted to say, John, which is I always tell my clients, if you could impact one person, would that be enough? Would that be enough for you to impact yourself and impact one other person? Would you do this if only two people mattered? And most often they say yes. And then
Yeah.
that's when I say, then stop worrying about the masses,
Yeah.
because that's what's tripping people up. When people start to get into this head game of like, oh my gosh, nobody's going to care. Why are they going to read my thing? My stories don't matter. Usually it's because what we're doing is we're thinking about like the hundreds of faceless people in the crowd.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when I'm like, nope, let's bring it in. I want you to focus on one person that you would like to reach. And then we talk about, your ideal avatar or somebody in your life that needs your story that you already know, right? And I say, like, name them if you don't know them. If you do know them, use their name. Take a picture of them, create a picture of them, whatever it is, and put it on your workstation. And every time you sit down to write, you write for them,
Mm.
because you only need the one. And if you can impact one, then I know you're going to impact several others. But
Yeah.
you just need one to focus on.
I've heard people say that, and I'm of that mindset that if you can just even impact one person, um, what can you take away from that? What kind of fulfillment can you take away from that? And I'm lucky where even if most of us think that way, like, okay, even if just one person takes that message away and I change their life in some way, that is good enough for me. Even though most of us that may think like that, we have different backgrounds of why that happens, why we believe that. For me, I mean, my parents were blue collar workers and I was the first to go to college, American dream, that whole thing. So for me to be able to create something that impacts somebody else, that I'm not like in a factory like my parents who came to this country to work harder for my sister and I to have a better life. Just the fact that I can create something, pull something out of the ether, put it down on paper, write something that impacts somebody else. That's fucking magic, man.
Yeah.
That's fucking magic. With all the bullshit that's going on in the world, especially if you can change somebody's life for the better, I think that's such a great gift. Obviously it costs time away from your family or whatever your writing habits are. But I mean, the fact that it's free, that you're giving yourself permission to share your experiences, whether good or bad, or your impressions of life or your work, whatever it may be, and then somebody can get better from that. That's like the biggest gift.
Yeah. Well, they always say like kindness is free, right?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
so is sharing your story, really. Now when it comes to writing a book, that's not always free, but the writing part can be.
You know what I mean? Yes, yes,
But
yes.
yes. Um, and
But I mean,
and yeah,
okay, I mean, books are important, obviously, but like with all the mediums, like Medium, that are out there, I mean, people can share like even little snippets of
yes,
them. I
yes,
obviously I love books, but it's just amazing that people have access to so many outlets as long as they learn that their story is important.
right. And that's the key part, right? That their story is important. And we know from like marketing research that storytelling in marketing and in sales and all these things like works, right? We know that we actually remember things differently when there's a story attached to the lesson. It's like we know this and we're taught that part, like, oh, well, stories can serve you if you're going to make a sale. And it's like, well, what if story wasn't about transaction? Like, what if story was about interaction and healing and dialogue and community change,
Transformation.
transformation? Like, because isn't that what I mean? Ultimately, that's what books are. But books are like low hanging fruit for us to increase our knowledge, increase our awareness, increase our consciousness, and therefore inspire us to change or help us with transformation or learn something new. And yet, at the same time, like there's still that like, well, why would I share my story?
Mm,
And I'm like, well, why wouldn't you?
yeah. Ellie, the book itself, the way that you said you did it in chronological order, where does it start? Where does it end? Just out of curiosity.
So the first letter is like probably pre 5 years old, but not much before that, where we're we're riding in a car to church and my brother and sister and I are swapping insults. Um, and that's the chapter about like things that my parents tried to bestow upon me, like sharpen your tongue. Um, and it ends with me heading out on my own in my own business. So
Okay.
from a memoir perspective, that's actually a pretty long period of time because it pretty much covers, my entire life. What makes it a little bit different is that I'm not giving every single year. I'm giving snapshots of various things over that period of time,
It's
and
like a highlight of lessons.
it's like a highlight of lessons. And so it's more a memoir that's thematic than it is like a linear chronological retelling of like this 10 years. Now, other memoirs like Eat, Pray, Love is a really famous one, even though it's considered old by now. That was like Elizabeth Gilbert's journey over however many months to go to the 3 countries, right? So memoir tends to be kind of a little bit more narrow in the amount of time, but it also just depends on the story you're trying to tell. The main thing is just that it's not from like usually like the play-by-play from birth till wherever you are now, typically.
And Allie, we've talked more or less about this, but just kind of in kind of almost wrapping up here, just a few more questions. What what lessons do you hope people take away from this? Like I
Mm.
said, you've sprinkled it throughout, but if you could put that in a few thoughts, what do you want people to draw away from the book?
So number one, I would want people to like take the time to reevaluate and investigate those, really critical moments that they always remember and ask themselves, what was I supposed to learn from this? Like, because it's a clue of something. I don't know what. That's something for people to determine, but like
Mhm.
I do believe that we need to go back and we need to look at all of those critical life moments and ask ourselves, what was this meant to teach me? Right? So that would be the first thing. The second thing is definitely about, permission to be oneself, whatever that looks like. Because I honestly believe that we are not permitted enough to be who we are supposed to be, because we are living inside a culture where one of the first questions that we're asked very early on is, what do you want to do when you grow up?
Hmm.
Or what do you want to be when you grow up? It's always what.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see the question to that change to who do you want to be when you grow up? Because I think when we try to trail after a certain vocation, because of what people around us are saying, we don't actually end up being whole and fulfilled people because we're chasing the wrong thing. Now this gets a little bit messy, right? Because I do feel like I was called to write. What I'm realizing now is that that was still under the guise of what do I want to do, and I'm now reevaluating. You know, am I a writer, or as I said earlier, am I a creative? I'm creative,
Hmm.
and my medium is writing, right? So I think that's the second thing, is that permission to be who you're going to be. Um, and the third thing is like you know choose differently. Like, yeah, shit happens to all of us. Like, but you get to decide how you respond. You get to decide if that was the worst thing to ever happen and it's unfair, or it was the worst thing to happen with the best possible lesson that you could receive.
Yeah, like it was the worst thing that happened up until that point, but so many great things maybe came out of it afterwards.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't take the pain away. It
Yeah.
doesn't make it
It
awesome
doesn't
that it
justify
happened.
that it happened.
It
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
justify that it happened, but like what meaning can you draw from it so that it can feel like there was at least something other than just pain and agony.
Mm, awesome. I love that. What do you think is next for your writing?
So I've got the one book that I'm working on with a colleague. That's for independent, well, nonfiction authors who are interested in publishing independently, and that's kind of like a straight nonfiction book that we're hoping is going to be like this amazing desk reference that everybody's just going to have right next to them as they're working on their book. And then apart from that, I'm applying for a creation grant here in the state of Vermont, to work on another memoir. And that one would be focused on actually one of the characters who gets introduced in Dear Universe. And that one would be about our relationship, and unfortunately, her death.
Um, sorry, that hit me. Was this the college roommate?
So, not the college roommate. This is actually a woman who was my daycare provider from 6 weeks. And she and I remained very, very close throughout our lives. And at the end of her life, she got cancer the second time, and she passed during COVID. But I had the hard blessing of being with her for her last week with her husband. and was there when she crossed over. So the memoir is not just a memoir about kind of how love doesn't have to be just about blood. It can be about bond,
Mhm.
but also kind of an inquiry around how do we take care of our elderly? How do we hold grace and space for their wishes when they know that the end is coming? Um, and also kind of about like how have we lived our lives? You know, do we feel good about what we've done on this earth by the time it's our time to go?
Wow, that'll be great. Yeah, there's so many life lessons in everything that you've shared. Whether it was outside of your book, your first book, that first book, what you're sharing with your writing partner, and then this book that you're working on. So that's amazing. Those are all. I love how it's very reflective, making people think about life, what it's about, where it's going, and what we want to leave behind.
Yeah, legacy for sure. I mean, even the people who are working on, you know, business nonfiction that I work with, I mean, ultimately they're doing it because they want to leave their industry or their community or something better off than when they found it, and they want to help other people succeed in that. I'm really fortunate that I work with a lot of great humans. Um, and that's kind of a qualifier to work with me. Like if you're not a great human, this ain't gonna work. But yeah, I mean, I think we get to do this once life,
Mm.
so let's do it the best that we can. Let's not waste any time. And actually, that's probably a fourth thing that I would say if people could walk away from your universe is it's like, what are you waiting for? Like, are you gonna wait until you're 80? You know, to
Yeah.
reevaluate all these things and try new things? Like, stop, don't. Like, okay, so you've got this far. Well, that doesn't mean like you should just give up because you're now, you know, X number of years and you feel like it's too late. It's not too late to figure your shit out
Mm.
and to live more fully. It's just not. And don't use it as an excuse.
Yeah, it's almost like if you have the idea that there is something you want, it's like that's enough. Go after it.
Yeah,
Don't sell yourself short.
exactly. You don't need anybody else's permission.
It's amazing how much of life we go through with that mindset, with childhood, wonder, awe, imagination. It's almost all indoctrinated out of us in school. And then it takes almost a lifetime to kind of find that again. But then hopefully, once you get to that point, you don't take it for granted. And that's why anytime I come across somebody that's like a late bloomer in terms of their career or they pivoted, it's almost like because it is later in your career, wherever it is that may have happened, it's like you hit it with twice as much energy just because of what you've already lived. Or like
Yeah,
if you were younger, it's kind of like, okay, yeah, I'll go down this route. But there's something about finding it later in life that you just hit it twice as hard because of those experiences you've had.
yeah. Well, and there's also this kind of interesting thing with like it doesn't necessarily even have to be yes late bloomer, but it could also be just what you've experienced gives you certain knowledge. Like, and I'm thinking about the late bloomer thing specifically because you know I remember working with my writing coach in my book, and I told her at one point before I was working on the book that I was a memoirist and I was working on a memoir. It was a different one at the time, and she kind of looked at me and was like, aren't you a little young to be writing a memoir? And I was like, I don't think so.
I
And
don't think so.
you know, and then when I told her about some of the things that were going to go be in the book, she was like, oh shit. Like, and it totally changed her perspective on this
Hmm.
idea that like age somehow
Yeah.
qualifies like how much you've been through. And I find this now, like most of the clients that I work with are 40 or above. They're always older than me, always. um and at some point that probably won't happen because I'm going to also age, but like right now, like all
Yeah.
of my clients are always older than me, and they're kind of like, you know, where does your wisdom and insight come from? And I'm like, fucking living.
Yeah. Exactly.
Like I'm
Exactly.
also here in this. Like, you know, I'm not absolved from, you know, crap happening or you know, challenges or whatever. So, you know, it's like you
I
might be
get
the late bloomer, like, and I'm not. Like, I don't know.
I guarantee that if we took away the bias that a memoir has to come from somebody that's later in life, older and whatnot, You could take your average 30-year-old, sit them down, interview them, and write a memoir of their lives, similar in the fashion that you have with yours, where you take these highlights of moments and you could find the lessons in them. I think it's just when you're that young, you don't think you have it in you. When you're that young, you don't understand what the lessons are. But I love that you bring up the fact that you don't have to be old to have your memoir. Like everybody, we've said it all along, everybody has a story, and a story can come at any age. I mean, you just have to pay attention to what's been going on, break
Yeah.
it down. But we're not that reflective when we're that young.
Also can be very true. And that's also feedback that I've gotten. They're like, you're unusual. I don't know that many people are this conscious. And I'm like, I've been in therapy since I was 15. So maybe it's that. I don't know. Been doing a lot of self-work for a long time. And I have a psychology background. So I mean, I'm probably slated,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
a little
yeah.
bit, a little bit different. But I do think that it's like, if you've got a story, you've got a story. Story defies age, gender, race, sexual orientation, like gender identity, all the things. Like story is story, and we all have one, and we all deserve to tell ours.
Last question, Allie. What is it you're up to these days? Is there anything that you want to share that you have coming up, or what you're up to? You already told us about your collaboration on this next book, but if there's anything that you want to share, please do.
I've always got stuff going on. So I would just love people to come and kind of follow over on LinkedIn, because that's where I'm posting all the time. And we're going to be doing more live video. We're going to be doing some interviews with clients, about their stories and how their stories serve them, which I think is great. And very in keeping kind of with our dialogue here today. So honestly, I just want to build a community. So if people want to come and hang out with me over on LinkedIn, they'll find all the information to head over to the website, sign up for the emails if they want. But I'd love to chat with people over there.
Awesome, Allie. Thank you for sitting down with me.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This is great.
And Allie's book is Dear Universe, I Get It Now, Letters on the Art and Journey of Being Brave and Being Me. I love all the lessons that she shared. Um, Again, I'm an introvert, so I reflect a lot, and I see a lot of myself in just that story and the ability to turn back and look at what the lessons are. So I think that's amazing. As for this interview, if there's anything that I might have missed, obviously we're limited on time. I could have kept going asking Allie questions all day. But if there's anything that I might have missed, you think I should ask, please reach out. I'll reach out to Allie, see if I can get some answers and kind of pick at her wisdom a little more. But in the meantime, thank you for those watching and listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.